the way that the real world, full of political strife and tragedy, is mitigated by magic on a magical boat called the Aqua Meridian. It takes place with two protagonists and two timelines. And I'm going to read a little bit from each to give you a taste of both sides of the story. This is Amy. It takes place in April 1973, Toronto. Amy, wake up. Mrs. Pine was shaking my shoulder. You can't sleep here. If you need to sleep, go home. How had I fallen asleep with the clatter and bang of the old linotype reverberating through the shop? I picked my head up from the drafting table and struggled to bring Mrs. Pine into focus. She was as solid and gray as the press as she ran. I felt a chill as her steely eyes took in my tousled hair and bloodshot eyes, then moved to the floor where a chaotic mess of colored markers, X-Acto knives, and technical pen plates gathered. I'm sorry, I didn't sleep again last night, but I'm okay now. I'll get right back to work. I was already on my knees gathering up the fallen art supplies as quickly as I could. When was the last time you had a proper night's sleep? I took a moment to consider. 1971? Mr. Pine was my mother's best friend, more like my aunt than my employer, but she was not amused. My literally falling asleep on the job pushed her too far. That's not funny. You need to see a doctor. Now that is funny. How am I supposed to do that? Legal Ontario residents had magic O-gift cards that entitled them to almost unlimited medical care, but she knew I slipped into the country illegally and had no papers. You can pay him in cash the same way we pay you, so there's no record. I'll explain the situation to my doctor. Sorry, can't risk it. I've got to stay under the radar, but thanks anyway. Mrs. Pine's face darkened and a deep crease appeared between her eyes. Go home, drink some tea, take a hot bath, and think about whether you want a future here or not. My heart skipped a beat. Was she threatening to fire me? She knew I'd be on the street or worse without this job. I could hear a slight quaver in my voice as I responded. What about this poster? I pointed to the design job I'd been working on. They need by tomorrow. She examined the work on my design table and nodded her approval. You can finish in the morning. Now, go home and get some sleep. What was the point of going home? It was easier to sleep in a noisy print shop than back in my apartment where Joni's ghost followed me from room to room. It had happened 2 years ago, yet her desperate calls for help still woke me from panic dreams of drowning. I gathered up my coat and purse, wondering if I'd just ruined my last chance for a new life. I was halfway out the door when Mrs. Pine called me back. And don't forget the party tonight. We're expecting you at 7. I thought of rushing out the door, pretending I hadn't heard, but Mrs. Pine was only a few feet away. I paused and took a breath. Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation, but like I said, I don't do parties. She stepped between me and the door, blocking my only means of escape. This has gone on long enough. You're not the one who died. Mr. Pine and Eddie, our pressman, were watching from the back room. I didn't want to make a scene, but a party? I'm sorry, I know you want to help, but I'm just not ready. Me, the good time girl at Fairport High, turning down another party. Joni wouldn't have believed it. Mrs. Pine took an umbrella off the coat rack and handed it to me. You'll need this, and you're coming to the party. There'll be people your age from the sailing club. Was she kidding? Sailors were the last people I want to meet. The very thought gave me the willies. I started to say no again, but she wouldn't listen. Consider it a condition of your employment, and I mean it. Oh, and bring a box of baklava from that Greek bakery next to your apartment. No excuses. Then she shoved me out into the rain and shut the door. 4 hours later, I was pounding on the glass door of Cosmo's Bakery, desperately trying to catch the attention of a young man in a white apron who was pulling trays from a display case. He looked up, pointed at his watch and shook his head. Despite my concerns, I'd overslept and arrived too late. I put my hands together in mock prayer, and this time the man came forward and unlocked the door. "We're closed," he said, pointing to the neon sign in the window. He spoke with an accent that evoked images of an older, warmer country. As he leaned toward me, I smelled cinnamon and sugar. It was just after 6 o'clock. The evening dusk made darker by clouds, a blustery wind and a spring rain threatening to turn to snow. The bakery's white tile walls radiated light and warmth as I stood shivering in a miniskirt and thin leather jacket on the damp pavement. "I promised my boss baklava. She'll kill me if I don't bring it." "She would kill you for this." He looked stern, but his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Absolutely, she's mad at me already." "Then you'd better come in. I don't want blood on my hands." His body had been blocking the doorway, but now he stepped aside. As I brushed past him, I was unnerved by his physical presence. He wasn't especially tall, yet his broad shoulders and muscular body dominated space. The shop smelled like home. Not the actual home where I'd grown up with a mother too busy selling real estate to cook. And certainly not the home I fled, teetering on its foundation. Rather, it smelled like the home I longed for, the one that provides shelter from all adversity and comfort for every sorrow. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and felt my own interminable pain subside for just a moment. When I opened my eyes, the baker was watching me with raised eyebrows and a bemused expression. "Your shop smells wonderful, absolutely intoxicating," I said, somewhat embarrassed. "It's not my shop. I just work here at night. During the day, I work toward a doctorate in economics." He grinned, pleased at disarming me with this revelation. "My name's Arcus." He held out his hand. I hesitated for an awkward moment, but how could I insult a man who just saved me from looking too incompetent to buy a box of pastry? I took his hand. "Amy." He smiled warmly as his fingers closed over mine. "Nice to meet you, Amy. Maybe you're a student too?" "Me? No, I used to be a student back in the States, but now I just work in a print shop." For some reason, in a country where I tried to be invisible, I wanted him to see me. "I studied art. I'm an artist," I added, much to my own surprise. He nodded approvingly as he released my hand. "I knew there was something special about you." He assembled a cardboard box and filled it with sticky pieces of nut-filled phyllo dough as we talked. I cringed. There was nothing special about my mediocre artistic talent. What made me special was the disaster I'd fled my country to escape. It was the reason I kept to myself and avoided idle chit-chat with good-looking men. I tugged at my short skirt, feeling exposed and embarrassed. Why was I even talking to this man? It was dangerous to forget myself. I made a show of looking at my watch. "Well, thanks for opening the bakery for me. I really appreciate it, but I've got to get going. How much do I owe you?" "Nothing. We were already closed, so this is officially yesterday's paycheck." "No, that's not right. I'm happy to pay whatever it costs." "Please, take it. We would just throw it away." He pressed a box tied up with blue ribbon into my hands. "Oh, your boss is Greek. Do you have other Greek friends as well?" "Other clients aren't Greek. Their son and his wife are just going on a Greek island cruise. This is for their bon voyage party." "So maybe you've never eaten in a real Greek taverna." I left the shop 20 minutes later with the baklava and an invitation to dinner at the Olive Tree for the following night. My heart pounded and my mind churned as I waited for the streetcar. What had I done? Why had I said yes? Arcus was charming, but that was no excuse. I had to remain inconspicuous and live in the shadows. Would Joni really want me to go on partying as though nothing had happened? Would she never see the sunshine? Never dance again? Mrs. Klein was wrong. Something in me had died. I was a recluse and an insomniac. I padded around my apartment at night talking to ghosts. It had been 2 years since the accident, but I still couldn't look in a mirror because it was always Joni who stared back at me with hollow, sunken eyes. Now, I know. 20 years in the future, we're going to meet Jacob, an elderly retired archaeology professor, also living in Toronto. He's from England. There's a brochure on my desk from Bayside Manor Retirement Home. Michael left it for me, even though he knows I can no longer read small print on shiny paper. No matter, I know what it says. It says, old man, you've had it. You're done. Pack up and move along. You've outlived your welcome in this world. A small incident set him off, a minor mishap he's blown out of proportion. I was out walking after dinner a few weeks ago and preoccupied, I missed my turn. Nothing odd about that. But by the time I realized what I'd done, the sun had set and I was wandering around in the dark. With better eyes, I could have managed, but, well, I got lost. Whichever way I turned, I only got further afield until I was exhausted. I must have been stumbling about because a policeman stopped to ask if I needed help. I'm fine, just fine, I told him. But I seem to have misplaced my apartment. It was a joke. I thought he'd laugh and point me in the right direction. Instead, he drove me home and notified my son. Ever since then, all Michael talks about is, wouldn't I be happier living with other people who'd cook my meals and see that I was safe? If Bessie were still here, she'd give him what for. No one ever pushed my Bessie around. I'd like to see anyone try to tuck her away in a warehouse for the doddering and incontinent. Sadly, I don't have my wife's fighting spirit, but I do have all my marbles and a tidy bank account, and I'm not going anywhere if I can help it. Lately, I've been thinking more and more about the past and the years I spent growing up in England. In memory, it's always a perfect morning in late May, and I'm always heading for the water. You wouldn't think a Jewish boy from Leeds would have such an affinity for the sea, but there you are. I made small wooden boats and launched them into the reservoir until the momentous day my father bought a Chris-Craft runabout, and we began spending weekends on the River Aire. I don't think he really cared for fishing, but his doctor told him to relax, to get away from the office, and boating appealed to him more than golf. I'd pilot the boat while he sat in the passenger seat reading the Times, eating salami sandwiches and grumbling about Bolsheviks and anti-Semites. Those days were the happiest of my life, at least until I met Bessie and discovered an entirely different magnitude of joy. So it's occurred to me that I have options. One of the world's great lakes is only a streetcar ride away. I could buy a small boat and go out fishing or sail to one of the Toronto islands. I can almost feel the wind in my hair and smell the open water. A man who can pilot a boat can certainly manage his own meals, pay his own bills, and is in no way ready for an old age home. Even Michael will have to concede that much. That's why I'm circling ads in the paper. I'm shopping for a boat. I'm going to jump to a point now where Jacob's found a likely prospect and he's meeting the new owner to view the boat. It's only 1:30 and Mr. McLaren isn't expecting me for an hour, so I have time to take in the sights as I proceed along the busy waterfront. It's been years since I ventured down to the harbor, and I'm surprised to see how much it's changed. There are all sorts of galleries and restaurants where there used to be nothing but shipping docks and warehouses. A group of shirtless punks with long hair whizzed past me on skateboards. They look like hooligans, and I feel inside my jacket pocket for the envelope containing the 5 crisp $100 bills Mr. McLaren requires as a good faith deposit on the boat. Reassured that the money's safe, I pick up my pace and arrive at the Amsterdam Bridge, our agreed meeting place with time to spare. I don't recognize Mr. McLaren until he's nearly beside me. He's a nice, clean-cut fellow, about my grandson's age, dressed in the Toronto Blue Jays hat and gray sweatshirt he told me he'd be wearing. I wave him over and we shake hands. Nice to meet you, Mr. McLaren. Bob, he said. Please call me Bob. I don't think anyone's ever called me Mr. McLaren before. I start to say, well then, call me Jacob. But he's so young and we've only just met, so I simply smile and say, nice to meet you, Bob. We exchange a few pleasantries and then get down to business. Bob waxes euphoric about the boat, and I'm thinking that if she's half the craft he says she is, he has her significantly underpriced. He may be aware that he's offering a bargain. You know, there's been quite a bit of interest in this boat. If you're serious, I'll need a cash deposit to hold her for you. Not wanting to give my hand away, I nod non-committally. You mentioned that on the phone. I have it right here. I pat my jacket pocket. But let's take a look at her first, don't you think? He smiles agreeably, and I follow him toward the slip where he has her docked. We're not halfway there when he feels inside his pants pocket and comes to an abrupt stop, a sheepish expression on his face. I'm so sorry, he apologizes. I'm a complete idiot. I've left the keys inside my car. Would you mind a little extra walk? I'm parked on a side street just around the corner. I'm already exhausted, but the poor man is clearly embarrassed, so I assure him there's no problem, that the extra walk will do me good, and we set off in the opposite direction. True to his word, we come to a small side street, an alley, really, where he's parked illegally. Parking is scarce and quite expensive in this part of town, so I don't blame him, but I do hope he doesn't have a ticket. He points to a black car parked beside a large trash dumpster. It's right over there. I'm so sorry for this inconvenience. Once we're standing beside the car, his whole demeanor changes. I'm not wasting my time if you don't have that deposit money, he says. Let's see it. I'm suddenly aware that we're in a blind alley with no one nearby. I told you I brought it, but if you've changed your mind, I understand. You don't have to show me your boat if you don't want to. I just don't want to waste my time if you're messing with me. You brought $500, right? I nod, dry mouth. My knees are shaking, but I'm trying to keep things normal. Show it to me, he demands. I want to see the money. I reach into my pocket and pull out the envelope. He grabs it from my hand, slips it open, counts the bills, then gets into the car. Wait, I say stupidly. I haven't seen the boat. He slams the door and starts the motor while I stand frozen on the street. As he pulls away, I lunge at the door. Wait, I shout as the car pulls away, throwing me to the side of the road where my head lands hard against a metal dumpster. I sit there dazed for several minutes. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. If I were younger, I could have stood up to him, but it's not in me anymore. I'm suddenly glad there's no one around to see me. An old man on his knees in front of a rubbish bin, fumbling for his glasses and blinking back tears. Someone my age are too weak to pull themselves up from the ground, but not me. I retain much of my strength and flexibility despite my 83 years, except now my legs refuse to hold me and I'm flailing on the pavement like an old bird with a broken wing, or Icarus trying to rise from the sea. It's useless. I'm sitting with my back against the dumpster, trying to catch my breath when a car pulls up beside me and a middle-aged woman rolls down her window. And I think I'd better stop there. But she points him in a very interesting direction.
Thank you, Pat. I think you pointed out some very good direction. I'm eager to see how the two timelines intersect or interrelate. And also, I got a sudden yang for baklava. Just a few more words about the friends, and we'll get for a second on there. I mentioned the regular weekly events. We also have some special events. First of all, we run a writing contest for writers of all ages. That has opened with the opening of the season and will close July 28th. Submissions are online, as with many things these days. In general, for any of the things I mentioned, if you go to chq.org/FCWC, you can find out more about the different events. Next week, on Wednesday of next week, we have a reception with friends here on this porch at 4 o'clock. Light refreshments and beverages will be served along with lively conversation. We'll ask for an RSVP to our email, which is friendsofthewriterscenter@gmail.com. On July 14th, Bastille Day and my grandson's birthday. We have the Authors Among Us book fair on Dexter Plaza. If you have a book you'd like to sell, please go online once again, and there's an application to fill out. And finally, favorite poem project, August 5th, I believe it's a Monday. That's where Chautauquans get to read their favorite poem. Not the Iliad or the Odyssey, something shorter. Okay. And briefly explain why you liked it so much, why it means so much to you. Our second author, Deb Pines, was an award-winning New York Post headline writer. She is also the author of 11 Mimi Goldman murder mysteries, set here at the institution. They're top sellers at the bookstore. She's also a grandmother of 3 and a former reporter. Deb is a lover of puns, Wordle, show tunes, and classic rock. She lives in New York City with her husband, Dave. Her latest book, Caught in the Snare, is the most recent of a series that has been called, quote, Agatha Christie for the text messaging age. And just a reminder, the books for both authors are for sale up here. So, Deb Pines.
Thank you, Fred, for the kind introduction and for all you do for this series and for writers in Chautauqua, including myself. Thanks everyone for choosing to spend your time with us when there's so many other wonderful things you could be doing in Chautauqua at this time. I think one of the fun things about these events is you're going to get 2 different experiences from 2 different authors. So I thought what I would do is talk a little bit about why I set my mysteries in Chautauqua. And then I will read a little bit from the back of the book of my latest book, and then I'll read a chapter, 1 chapter or maybe 2 chapters if we have time for that, and then leave room for questions for both of us. So why do I set my mysteries in Chautauqua? I'm happy to pose and answer that question here in Chautauqua, because when I do that elsewhere, it's very hard to explain to Chautauqua to people. I'm sure you've all had the same experience. And I end up first saying what it's not. And when I'm in the New York City area, a lot of people go, oh, I know Chautauqua. That's where Bill and Hillary Clinton live. And we have to go, no, that's Chappaqua. That's not Chautauqua. And with some mystery readers and some mystery writers, I think they give me a lot of credit and think that I have invented Chautauqua. They think it's a fictional place, and maybe because it's too good to be true, I don't know. But they think that it's the same kind of invention that Agatha Christie did with St. Mary Mead, sleepy British village that is the hometown of my favorite mystery sleuth, Miss Marple. Or they think it's like 3 Pines, which is what Louise Penny's quaint Canadian village, which is fictional. Or they think it's Cabot Cove of Murder, She Wrote, which by the end of that run probably had a murder rate that rivals any big city. And I'm afraid that's what's happening here by book 11 of my Chautauqua murder mystery. Why do I use Chautauqua for that purpose? The same reason the others have chosen a small town setting. And I have 100 reasons, but I'm just going to say 3 of them here to keep things brief. And one of them is the charm of using a small, close-knit community where people live very closely in denomination houses, in rooming houses, in cottages, side by side. And many of them have come for many generations. So there's an illusion that you really know your neighbors. And so when something bad happens in all my books, the neighbors are too trusting, and that leaves an opening for Mimi Goldman, my recurring sleuth, who's a reporter at the Chautauquan Daily and a former copy editor at the New York Post, like I am. And so the outsider in a community that's close-knit and fooled by that generational, connection, it's an opening for Mimi as the outsider to solve crimes. Why else set it in Chautauqua or a small town? And that's because if there are small town police, it's plausible, even if not 100% convincing, that Mimi Goldman, 60-something, reporter at the newspaper, and her 90-year-old sidekick, year after year, beat the police in figuring out who murdered, who did the crime, who done it. So if there's a small town police force, it's more plausible. My third reason is that in a beautiful idyllic spot makes us a good setting for a murder mystery, because any offense in that setting is more of an outrage. We're more offended by a sin in paradise. And P.D. James, the very accomplished British mystery writer, said that the detective story is not really about murder, it's about restoring order. And I think if you have a murder in a beautiful, let's say, a quaint tree-lined lakeside arts community that's kind of churchy and quirky with high-minded lectures, when you have a crime committed in that setting, the writer hopefully doesn't have to work so hard to get readers on board of the same chase that we're all hoping to find justice, to catch the bad guy, and within usually 275 pages or so, have a happy ending, restore order, amen. That's, in short, the formula for all of my murder mysteries here. There's variations. The latest one, Caught in the Snare, I'm going to read the hyped brief summary on the back, and then I'll read a chapter or two depending on time. So when Velma White, a tyrannical landlady, now 74 and shaky on her feet, is found dead at the bottom of the stairs of her Chautauqua home, it looks like an accident. But was it? Only digging by Mimi Goldman into Velma's money, men, and murky past can solve this extra tricky puzzler. So that's what this one's about, is a lot of them involve what could be natural causes. Chautauqua's saying it's got to be natural causes or nothing suspicious, and Mimi Goldman, the outsider, following clues to clues to clues to solve the crime. I'm going to start with chapter 1, which is, and they're all pretty brief chapters, but because I'm the headline writer, I've given them lately headlines for the chapter title, and this one is called Velma's Last Symphony. 3 nights before Velma White was killed, Mimi had noticed her at the symphony. Just a few seats away, Velma seemed at first unremarkable. Another over 60 classical music fan in an amphitheater full of them. Midway through a piano concerto with a guest pianist, though, Velma pulled out her cell phone. "Corinne," she said loudly, "now, come get me now." Did everyone turn? It felt like it. The woman wasn't just loud, she was indignant, as if she were the victim, not the asshole in the story. You see, around Mimi, there were head shakes and shushes. Velma hung up. The music swelled. The pianist's fingers raced across the keys, and virtually everyone in the Chautauqua amphitheater moved on. Not Mimi. Nosier than most, she continued to stare. Velma looked to be in her 70s and was well put together. Her chin-length, reddish-brown hair, nails, and makeup were done. She wore white pants, a pink cardigan, pearls, and a disapproving scowl. A few minutes later, a Black woman arrived. She whispered something to Velma. Velma shook her head while allowing herself to be helped up and out of the row. Leaning on a cane, she continued slowly up the aisle and out of the amp. For several days, Mimi didn't give Velma a second thought. Mimi did her job at the Chautauqua Daily. She checked in often with Walt, her husband, away on a 2-week engineering gig in Buffalo. She texted with Jake, her son. She watched videos of her grandson. She played Wordle and read. On Saturday, between jobs, Mimi browsed the grapevine. Some posts sought a reliable plumber, a pet-friendly apartment, or rides to and from the Buffalo airport. Others wanted to ditch or sell things like bikes and high chairs, lamps, life jackets, wicker porch furniture, and handmade pens made from wood salvaged from the prior Chautauqua amphitheater. Then came an obituary. Hold on. The photo caught Mimi's eye. It was her, the woman from the concert. Velma White, the obit said. She was 74 and a native of Santa Claus, Indiana, a tiny town Mimi had heard of from feel-good holiday stories about its post office answering piles of letters addressed to Santa. A widow, Velma was also a mother of 2 who loved to travel, said the obit. She was an active member of the Daughters of the American Revolution and Indiana's Colonial Dames, who supported various arts organizations in Indianapolis and Chautauqua, New York, where she summered for 40 years. Mimi held the photo closer. Velma looked about 60, wearing sunglasses and a big straw hat and a smug expression. She stood in front of Angkor Wat, the spectacular ancient Cambodian temple, topped with pine cone-shaped towers. The obit named her survivors, 2 daughters, Shari White of Chautauqua, New York, and Teresa White of Columbus, Ohio. 1 niece, Ramona Ingram of Rochester, New York, and a sister, Iris Matthews of Fairview, Pennsylvania. Charitable donations instead could be made in Velma's memory to the Michael J. Fox Foundation. It concluded by saying Velma had died the previous day, quote, after a tragic accident in her Chautauqua home. Keep going. All right. I'll read one more chapter, and the chapters after that one were the police coming to the scene, the body being examined, the people in the house. She rented rooms in that house, saying she'd been shaky on her feet. She was pretty vain about using her cane. They think that she must have just fallen, and that's what happened and why she's at the bottom of the stairs. A few days later, I'll shift to Mimi. The headline of this is Mimi and Sylvia are on the case. Okay. By Monday, Mimi was eager to chat things out with her 90-year-old crime-solving buddy, Sylvia Pritchard, over coffee in Bester Plaza. She got there first and bought their $4 coffees to head off Sylvia accusing the poor teenage barista of highway robbery. Morning, she called as Sylvia approached their usual bench. So good to see you. You too, she said. They hugged and Mimi handed over her coffee. Still hot, Sylvia said approvingly. Thanks. My pleasure. For a few minutes, they enjoyed being together on a sunny day surrounded by so much charm. Blue skies, bright flowers, towering trees, dogs, and people coming and going. How are you guys? Sylvia asked. All good, Mimi said, filling her in on Walt's Buffalo gig and Jake's latest consulting work. How about yours? Mimi asked. Tom's loving an art class he's taking here in collage making. Gerard? Mimi laughed at how Tom Jr.'s German Shepherd had claimed such a prominent spot in Sylvia's heart. Yes, you remember how Tom got Gerard. Remind me. Gerard flunked out of the police academy, supposed to be a drug-sniffing dog, but he was, they said, untrainable. I'd say independent. Okay, right. Anyway, we are enjoying him. He's very smart and a lot of fun. Mimi smiled. Now that her coffee was cooler, Mimi enjoyed a few sips. So did Tom Jr. have anything to add about Velma White? Mimi asked. He never wants to badmouth other foreigners, but from what he heard, the guy showed up plastered, barely examined Velma, and called it a tragic accident. Tom Love, a funeral home director, was very conscientious, Tom Love Jr., about his side gig as a coroner, and he expected the same from other coroners, mainly other funeral home directors and a few nurses responding to local death scenes. Not impossible, Mimi said. Velma was shaky on her feet and probably had Parkinson's. Did Tinsdale tell you all of that? No, Tinsdale's the cop. No, after the older daughter called me, I tried Tinsdale. He wouldn't tell me much. Velma's obit asked for donations to the Michael J. Fox Foundation, so I thought Parkinson's. And didn't I tell you I saw Velma at Thursday's concert before I knew who she was? Sylvia narrowed her eyes. Now you remind me. Mimi described Velma noisily summoning her aide during the piano concerto. Oh, right, Sylvia said. Did she seem old? Not to me. The obit said 74. She moved slowly, but her voice was strong. Sounded like an energetic pain in the ass. Sylvia nodded as Mimi dug out her notebook and flipped to the page she wanted. So, if it turns out to be a homicide, Sylvia said, you're saying don't rule out the guest pianist? They shared a grim laugh. Okay, Mimi said, what got me started was the call last night from the older daughter, Teresa White, not Sherry, the yoga teacher who lived with Velma. You know Teresa? Not well. We overlapped at the Daily maybe 10 years ago. She was a summer intern covering religion. If I'm remembering right, she was super sweet. No, Velma? Mimi smiled. Teresa went on to become a kindergarten teacher in Columbus, Ohio. Of course she did. On the phone, she said she was frustrated with the police. They weren't answering her questions, seemed to only be considering one possibility that Velma fell. She wondered if I had heard anything. When I said no, she asked if we could, dig around a little. So Teresa is suspicious? Must be. Did she say why? She was vague. I got the impression someone recently made a big offer on Velma's house or was about to, and the timing of Velma's death struck her as possibly related. Vague indeed. I didn't press the girl because she sounded rattled. She was packing to drive here last night. We're meeting tonight at 6 at 3 Taps. Want to join us? I'll see how I feel. Probably not. Learn anything else? Teresa said she and her sister expect to be Velma's main heirs. Velma also promised small sums to a niece, the one staying with her husband in Velma's attic, and to Velma's older sister. How small, I wonder, Sylvia asked. Mimi nodded. Also wonder how much the sisters stand to inherit. Mixed signals on Velma's wealth. If she has a lot, why rent rooms? And why is the house such a dump, Sylvia asked. So you know the house? Mimi's surprise earned a glare. A fifth-generation Chautauquan, Sylvia prided herself on knowing virtually every single property on the gated 750-acre ground. It's the wreck, just past the president's house on the lakeside, before the road bends for the last stretch of North Lake, Sylvia said. They enjoyed their coffees and watched a few birds fly between the bushes and trees. Was it just the daughter and niece in the house when Velma fell? Sylvia asked. Fell? Or whatever happened. The niece wasn't there, went to Rochester with her husband. There were 4 other renters and Velma's aide. Teresa sent me a list with names and descriptions. Thank goodness Teresa is a teacher. Mimi reached into her backpack. I made you a copy, she said, handing it over. Sylvia put on her glasses. Her gaze traveled down the page. Know anyone else? Mimi asked. Well, everyone knows Rosemary Marino. I don't. Sylvia sighed. Her knife skills class sells out every summer. I took it years ago and loved it. Rosemary's a giant personality who enjoys being outrageous. Mimi smiled. Outrageous sounded promising for someone used to getting blown off by more cautious types. Rosemary's daughter was a disappointment to her. Sylvia said softly. I can't remember why. She went back to reading the list. The two men and Corinne Hudson aren't familiar, she said. Corinne is Velma's aide. She's an attractive young Jamaican woman. Matt Stevens is the young man filling in at BTG for the guy who takes care of Chautauqua's Purple Martin houses. I've heard good things about the kid, said Sylvia, an avid gardener and lifetime BTG member. I didn't remember his name. Kevin Rogers is a retired chemistry teacher, Mimi said, the guy who called 911. The bell tower chimed 8:30. That was when Bester Plaza traffic picked up. Many adults heading to a 9:15 daily church service at the Amp stopped at the post office, bookstore, or coffee kiosk on the east side of the rectangular green space. Many kids biked past heading to club, the day camp for school-age kids that starts at 9 at the south end. Mimi, hoping to get to work by 9, stood up. So what do you think, Mimi said? Divvy up the list and start making calls? Or should we stop by Velma's now to get the lay of the land? My Toms, FYI, think we should wait, Sylvia said, until an autopsy tells us what really happened. Mimi said, so you want to hold off? Of course not. Let's go see the house.
Well done. Well done. Very nice, very enticing. I sort of felt like if I was watching Midsummer Murders and I listened to something to see, you know, and all the places. That's very neat. I also wondered about the name Velma. Did you ever watch Scooby-Doo?
I did. I don't know why I chose that. I wanted an old lady-ish name, but I chose that, yeah.
We do have time for some questions for either author or both authors. Any questions from the audience about their writing, whatever occurs to you? Yes, right there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered, well, I'm actually asking you, what's your process for like compiling? How do you want to go about it?
Okay, the question is about the process. If you want to use the mic, you can.
A little embarrassed. I'm kind of an undisciplined writer. It's like I don't have a process. Whenever I have some free time, which isn't as often as I would like, I sit down at my computer and I work. I tend to write chronologically. Not all authors do. They may skip around and just write whatever scene is most appealing at that given time. I'm a pantser. I don't always know how it's going to end. Well, actually, I do know how it ends, but I don't know what the middle is going to be when I start. I always have a beginning and an ending. And that's my process.
Yeah, I think we're similar in
Yeah.
that, you know, I usually start with the ending, you know, how it's going to work out. And I might have a few twists along the way, but I change it quite a bit as I go along. And I think one thing I've learned along the way is just to stop second guessing my process. You know, I used to think I should be outlining, and I do a combination of outlining and just letting it roll. And I think one thing I've learned over the way is your process is your process. If you get it done, you know, don't stop spending effort on that. That's you know, it works to do it that way. I would add one other thing. I don't know, is that I believe rewriting is a lot of the work, right? Rewriting for me includes a little collaborative because friends and family read a draft. And so I'm rewriting not just to fix what I saw, but to fix what people have pointed out. And I think problem solving and rewriting is part of the more fun for me. Here. Okay.
Any other questions? Yes. Have there ever been any murders in
There have.
Chautauqua?
Well, I mean, people ask me that so much that by book 4, before I felt like I really needed to read it. And so in the I think it's the 1940s, there was a murder at the Cary Hotel. And there was staffers, who were in a love triangle, and they ended up, one killing the other. And, they were hired help that came in for the summer. They were Black people who came in, and the crime was not covered as much as it would have been if they were Chautauquans. So that happened, and I have the notes on that somewhere, but that's the main thing. And then more recently, sadly, a member of the Chautauqua Symphony was killed off the grounds, in a home she rented nearby by, in a botched robbery, which was very tragic, but they caught the guys pretty quickly afterwards. Murder at the Cary Hotel. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I don't know whether it's supposed to be. By the way, it looks like you're wearing an Angkor Wat shirt. Having been to Angkor Wat.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Okay. But I just wondered whether you had a theme in mind because, like before you wrote the book, where did you start? Did you start with, transitions, insecurity?
The question is about whether they started with a theme, an idea in mind.
Some kind of theme, and then built the story around handling transitions or whatever. Yeah. I don't know, insecurity, dealing with trauma. Yeah.
This is going to sound odd, but I think I usually start with a visual image. Some picture comes to me of characters interacting or a setting. And then beneath that, there's usually an awareness of some emotionally evocative feeling that the novel will carry. And then later on, as I write, themes of some vaguely political themes or social themes kind of interweave themselves into the book. But I don't think I've ever, decided I am going to write a book about, the injustice of something or to prove something or to make a point. I don't start that way. Which, if any of that wends its way into the book, it's incidental to the process.
I think the original intent. Yeah, the theme is always, like we said, restoring order, getting justice. It's an old-fashioned whodunit. It's not something modern where the good guys and bad guys are hardly distinguishable. So I want you to root for, justice to prevail. I had read, somewhere like if you want to elevate it and make people enjoy it, have a theme. And so like maybe one time I was able to have a theme weave through the book. It wasn't that I started out with that theme, but in last year's book, a podcaster was killed, a young woman, and she was working on cold cases, and she was kind of working to keep alive the memories of victims from the past. And then, so the idea is, she was a champion for sort of forgotten victims. And then when her own death happens and Mimi takes that cause on, she's kind of passing it forward, kind of thing, and that both women were taking cases that people may have forgotten and, bringing them to the forefront and making sure that justice was done. And I think if you could have a theme, I think it does make it more powerful. But I have, very rarely succeeded in weaving that through, it's an aim. I think it's a good aim.
I wish I could remember the name of the, I think it was a theater critic who said something like leave messages to Western Union. But sometimes when things are too heavy of a message, they lose the story and the character. Yeah. But someone who can do both, or all great story, character, and an idea, Yeah,
Right.
that's great. Any final questions? Oh, the lovely woman back there, yes. Oh, that, oh, yes, that's my wife.
That's fine.
Yeah, I was curious as
Well
to, whether either of you do some research, when you're putting your, books together.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I do a ton of research. I'm a former reporter and I enjoy research. Sometimes it feels like procrastinating, but I actually reward myself with that. And I try not to just dump it in there. But in this book, I have the guy who cares for the Purple Martins. I knew nothing about Purple Martins, but I thought that would be interesting to learn about. And I've seen him, you know, at the Purple Martin talk. I've tried to disguise him as the younger, much younger person, just filling in for the veteran naturalist. But I had to learn a lot about the Purple Martins, and I hope I've gotten it right. But yes, I do a lot of research and enjoy that part too.
Ditto.
Yeah.
My books require a huge amount of research. Like this new book, there's the one character is a retired archaeologist, and I had to learn a great deal about ancient languages, mysterious spice that is actually exists. And I, like Deb, I really enjoyed that part of the process.
Also, sometimes if I talk to an expert, I show them my work afterwards because I think I've understood it, and I have not fully understood it. So they sometimes, you know, correct it even after I've written a chapter.
When I was younger, I used to think that writers were all super geniuses who just knew all this stuff, but just poured out of them. I didn't realize how much work went into accumulating and organizing the background information you need to write. And you don't always use it all, but I think it still informs the text if you got it.
Let me make this couple announcements about upcoming events before we adjourn. So CLSC authors of the Mary Benedict, Victoria, Christopher Murray, authors of The First Lady, the novel, they'll speak at 3:30 on Thursday in the Hall of Philosophy. Didn't want to remind you of the informal critique. That follows what's called a community read. Things have been revamped in terms of schedule, and on Friday, there will be people from the writing workshops will be reading from their work, plus the two teachers will have some things to say. Please consider coming to the office hour next week when we have two poets, Anne E. Wallace, who wrote Days of Grace and Silence, a collection of poems about having long COVID, which unfortunately is an experience many people have shared. And Karen Wyatt will be reading from Avoiding the Rapture. Please join us again, but let's close by giving a round of applause. Thank you very much.
You can buy books if you want to stick around or chat with us some more.
Yes.
Yes or no?
Beside your own hand. I wish I did.
Hello.
Are you